Welcome, everybody, to Yes Labels podcast. I'm Justin Clark here with Bill Stepien. Warm August day here in our nation's capital and around a lot of the country. A lot of news today. We're going to talk, like we always do, about presidential politics and other goings on in the political world. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to follow us, like us, any of the stuff that you're supposed to do on comments. Yeah, well, we're going to jump right into it today. We've got hot off the presses, National Public Affairs, the firm that Bill and I work for, founded, is out with our monthly South Carolina presidential primary survey. We've been doing this since the early spring, kind of tracking where everybody stands in South Carolina, and we're going to do a little exclusive release on the podcast today. Bill, I'm going to kick it over to you to lead us off on this, and why don't you jump in and let everyone know how the Republican presidential candidates are doing in South Carolina.
Well, I'm going to start with and by the way, good morning. Good to talk to you again. Good to talk to our listeners. I'm going to actually start with a quick blast from the past. I saw this very interesting tidbit just yesterday, actually, where the last three contested Republican primaries were 8 years ago, 12 years ago, and 16 years ago. Super interesting. 8 years ago, in national polling, 2015, August 2015, Trump was leading the pack nationally with a 12-point edge. 2011, August 2011, Romney was leading by 5. And way back in 2007, August 2007, Mayor Rudy Giuliani was leading the Republican primary contest by 10 points. Today in 2023 nationally, Trump leads by an average of almost 39.1%. Interesting to go back in time to see where things were. The lead of 39 points. At this point in the primary contest, no front runner leading by 20 or more has ever lost, and Trump is now leading by 39 nationally. So it tells you a lot. But you're right.
Who was the last front runner to lead by 20? The Trump, Romney, and Giuliani numbers, just for our listeners to get a sense of when the last time that happened was.
I have to go back and look. You stumped me. I didn't go far that back into the data. No one has lost with a lead of at least 20 at this point in the contest, and it's August now. It's deep in the heart of August. It's not April anymore. Things are getting late. We're just a few months away from the first votes cast in Iowa. So we've been tracking the polling in South Carolina. I think this is our 4th monthly poll. We were in the field in early August 7 to August 9th, with a universe of 846 likely primary voters in South Carolina. And very, very interesting stuff. If you rewind to April, Trump was leading the pack with 43%. DeSantis was at 21. Nikki Haley was at 19. Where are we now? Where are we now in early August? Trump is at 45% of the ballot. DeSantis is at 13. Nikki Haley is at 11. So, Justin, quite a change in just a couple months in terms of who's leading, at least in terms of the spread between Trump, DeSantis, and Haley.
Yeah, it just keeps growing. And, the interesting thing to me is there's just been a solid tick down since the spring for Governor DeSantis in terms of the ballot. It's not been a dramatic drop, but it's been precipitous. And he's just 5 points each month going down, down, down. We're seeing the same thing with Ambassador Haley, but that is just not a place that it's not sustainable to be on that kind of trend. These polls are snapshots in time, but that kind of trend line is just really hard to pull out of.
I said that it's not April anymore. If you look at the race back in April, Trump was up 43-21 to 19 over DeSantis at 21, Haley at 19. So he had two contenders in DeSantis and Haley in or around the low 20s. Tim Scott was not yet a factor. He was only at 7%. Chris Christie at that point was not yet in the race. And while Ramaswamy was being viewed generally favorably by voters, he was a blip on the radar screen at just 1%. If you jump ahead to May, Trump dropped by 5. DeSantis gained a few. The race was tightening. It was 38-23 Trump over DeSantis. And We know the DeSantis team, when we issued this poll publicly, they were crowing about, the tightening race and a 15-point race. Things were getting tighter. But boy, what's happened since? Trump regained his footing in June, up again in August. DeSantis is down both months. What was once a 15-point race in May has now doubled to 32, a 32-point advantage for Trump. And what's changed? You mentioned that DeSantis was down 5 points from our last poll to this poll in August. Trump's firmed up his base. Support among middle-aged voters, 45 to 64, he's up 7 on the ballot. Non-college graduates +9 since the last poll, and evangelical men +6. So we always hear about the base, the Trump base being strong. Well, it's gotten stronger because those three groups are certainly groups that you would consider to be part of the base. Where's the DeSantis lost ground since our last poll? He's lost ground among that same group, 45 to 64-year-olds. So Trump gained 7. DeSantis lost 7 among that age bracket. He's down 7. DeSantis is down 6 among women, and especially among older women, 65 plus women. He's down 8, down 7 among evangelicals. That's a problem in South Carolina. And look, don't sleep on the fact that Ramaswamy. We've talked a lot about Trump and DeSantis and Haley, but Ramaswamy is at 5%. He's taking some votes from DeSantis as a Trump light option. Chris Christie, we mentioned his name. He's taking some votes from Nikki Haley as an anti-Trump or never Trump option. So those they're not big numbers. Christie at 7, Ramaswamy at 5, but those numbers add up, and those votes are not coming from Trump. Those votes are coming from DeSantis and Haley. And by the way, Tim Scott's picking up some steam. We're seeing that in Iowa. We're seeing it in South Carolina too. He was at 7 points way back in April. He's consistently, he was at 10 in May, 10 again in June, 11 now. So while others are losing ground, his footing has kept pretty steady.
He's also in terms of spending. I mean,
Yep.
This is smart on his part.
doubt.
Well, I don't know if it's smart on his part or not. I think that's like a TBD, but that's keeping his numbers where they are. I think it's a pretty significant spend from his super PAC.
It is, and I think Nikki Haley's numbers are interesting to me. Again, she's dropped in every single poll. Started at 19, neck and neck with Ron DeSantis in a strong number 3, really essentially tied for second place. Then it was down to 15, then down to 12, now 11. This is obviously South Carolina. This poll is her home state. As someone who's worked for a governor in Chris Christie way back in the day in New Jersey, I ran his first campaign for governor. I ran his second campaign for governor. I worked in the governor's office in between. This is a 2-term governor in Nikki Haley, who was in a very high-profile role at the United Nations. Obviously was elected twice in the state by 15 points the second time, had a rocky first year as governor in South Carolina, but really rebounded to become one of the nation's most popular governors. I saw this past week, back in time, a CNN headline in 2018 that asked the question, is Nikki Haley the most popular politician and governor? My experience, so she was sky high, and people were very high on Nikki Haley's chances way back when. But just thinking about the mechanics of this being her home state, her being a 2-term governor and in the state legislature long before that, there's no more politically powerful position in state politics than being governor. You start and you maintain, my experience has shown, you start and you maintain your own political operation, you make political appointments, you offer political support to state legislators in their elections, you have dinners with donors at the governor's mansion, you do small stuff like you invite the Little League championship team to the governor's mansion for a photo op. To be at 11% in this poll in her home state after 2 terms of doing all that, hopefully she was doing all that, is pretty astounding to me, Justin.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I mean, doesn't seem that long ago, but she hasn't been governor for almost 7 years. I'm sure if we had polling in New Jersey, I'd love to compare who's doing worse in their home state, Governor Christie or Governor Haley. But it's a really good point that this stuff is ephemeral and it doesn't last and things change. Politics change. The party in a lot of ways is a very different party from the one Nikki Haley got elected governor in 2010 and got reelected in 2014 in. Frankly, it's very different from the party that supported a president who appointed her as the ambassador to the United Nations. So there's a lot of that in there, and fame and name ID and all of these things that we talk about are fleeting, and you got to keep up on it, and you got to press it. That's something that's just hard to do, but it's a great point. People like to assume that, oh, this person's from this state, they carry those votes with them. They don't. People's opinions change on people. That said, and we're going to get into consideration in a minute, her numbers are not, there's not a visceral dislike of her if we're looking at kind of her consideration numbers in terms of whether candidates will consider voting for her or not. They've declined as her poll numbers have declined, which is not a surprise. But in terms of candidates that would consider voting for, she's still right side up. 45% would consider voting for her, 41% would not in our survey. That's a big drop from May, where she was at 62% would consider voting for her, 25% wouldn't. So there's a move away from her that I agree with you is pretty interesting and should be worthy of people digging into it. There could be a lot of factors in that, right? One, she's kind of taken a pretty hard anti-Trump stance. Two, she's got another politician who was reelected, I believe, in 2022 statewide, and Tim Scott, who's gotten in the race since then, that is probably sucking up some of that support. And in terms of consideration, his has remained largely consistent. There's a lot of factors at play here, but I find the Haley numbers very interesting too, mostly because she started out, as you mentioned, at a level that was pretty competitive in our polling with President Trump.
And let me just give you the full hot off the press top line ballot. Trump is at 45. This is the South Carolina statewide primary survey conducted by National Public Affairs. Trump is at 45, +4 from our last poll. DeSantis is at 13, -5 from our last poll. Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, both at 11%. Nikki Haley -1, Tim Scott +1 from our last poll. Chris Christie at 7, +2 from our last poll. Mike Pence at 2, no change from our last poll. Ramaswamy is at 5. I should have mentioned him right after Christie. He's up 3 from our last poll. Hutchinson, Burgum are both at 1. So, you mentioned that's the current lay of the land in the state. You mentioned Tim Scott. You're right. You might say that Scott and Haley are both feeding from the same, pool of home state votes. Let's accept that argument. Let's add up then Tim Scott's 11%. Let's add up Nikki Haley's 11%. Let's pretend they both combined South Carolina votes. They're at 22. That's still less than half of Donald Trump's 45 in the state. And
that's right.
We've talked a lot about who's going to survive until South Carolina, which we talked about in a previous podcast, is later than it ever has been, or at least has been in a while. And that's going to play a factor in who can survive all the way to the contest in South Carolina. Look, Haley is fading in Iowa. She's let me look at the current polling. By the way, while Tim Scott's gaining, Scott's in third place at 10%. Haley's in fifth place behind Ramaswamy in Iowa. In New Hampshire, it's worse. Haley's in sixth, tied with Doug Burgum. My sense, and I think you talked about this in a previous podcast, if Scott exceeds expectations in Iowa, he'll get a bounce into New Hampshire, where he's currently in third, and that spells really, really long-term trouble for Haley. And you've said it. I don't think both South Carolina candidates are in the race by the time South Carolina rolls around.
No way.
Add on the fact that Scott's got a well-funded super PAC and Haley only raised $7 million last quarter. If you're looking for the person headed to the exits first among the second tier of candidates, there's a good chance it's Nikki Haley.
Yeah, I as of right now, absolutely. She's got to do something to turn this around, because it's a slide and it's really hard to get out of those slides, but she needs to do something to be able to do it. She hasn't done it to date. We haven't seen it happen. She got a good bounce, a good pop out of her announcement, but it's just been the air slowly letting out of the balloon since then. And I'm not sure how she recovers.
All right, I've talked enough about the ballot. What
Yeah.
what was interesting to you?
So what was really interesting to me was one of the questions we ask is a candidate consideration survey. The crux of it is to figure out if people would consider voting for a candidate or not. We ask about for each candidate a total of 7 questions. I'm going to read you the question, Bill, just so it's easier. We're going to read you a list of some of the most likely candidates. Please rate each candidate on a 7-point scale. 1 means that you would almost certainly vote for that person, and 7 means you almost never vote for that person, certainly never vote for that person. However, you can use any number from 1 to 7 to rate these candidates. 4 means that you're completely neutral. We ask this question in order to obviously determine if someone would consider voting for a candidate. And we've seen a lot of interesting stuff over the past couple months. The consideration numbers for are either really good. So, for instance, Donald Trump has remained over 60% consistently in terms of the total would, that would be 1 through 3, versus the total not, which is 5 through 7. Tim Scott has remained consistently over 60% since he's gotten in terms of consideration. Ron DeSantis has started out with the highest consideration in our first survey. Well, back in May, I'll start with May. He was at 68%. His candidate consideration has dropped to 54% since that time. That's a 14% drop and a 5% drop since June. It's a pretty big move. We already discussed Nikki Haley. Vivek Ramaswamy has steadily climbed up, but he's still kind of in the 30%. He's at 33% total would versus 31% total not would, with a huge neutral number or unaware number. The 2 most striking negative ones are former Vice President Pence and former Governor Chris Christie. It's pretty staggering. And I'll start with Governor Christie, who has consistently been under 20% in terms of the total number of people that would vote for them. Compare that to Tim Scott or Donald Trump, or who are over 60%. Governor Christie was at 17% in May, 17% in June, 16% in August, and has been just under 70%, is just under 70% in terms of total not. In terms of almost certainly not, the 7, the absolute hardest one, 51% of Republican voters would almost certainly not vote for Governor Christie. In a close second in terms of the negative jumps are former Vice President Pence. In May, he started at a 34% in terms of people that would vote for him. The next month was down to 26, and this month is down to 18. That's an 8-point slide since last month. And the total not is at 65%. His almost certainly would not number, his 7, is at a 46%, which is about 5 points better than Governor Christie. But those are some really bad numbers and really tough odds for anyone who's trying to win a primary in the state of South Carolina, where each of them, Governor Christie and former Vice President Pence, have almost 100% name ID. The unaware number is negligible for both of them. That's a really steep hill to climb if you're Mike Pence or you're Chris Christie, where you're at half of the voters in a state saying they almost certainly would not vote for you. That's a really tough place to be for either of those gentlemen. So while we see their ballot numbers move, especially Governor Christie's go up, he's just going to have a hard ceiling in terms of people that'll vote for him.
I like the fact that we ask this question and will continue to, because it's a little bit of a preview into the ballot numbers before people actually say they're going to vote for a person. I remember, I think 2 months ago, we saw a very positive movement from Ramaswamy, and we openly said there was a big jump in his consideration score. I think I openly asked the question: This is a big movement and a very notable movement. Is it ever gonna, the next step will be to see if that translates into a change on the ballot? And sure enough, we're seeing not huge numbers from Ramaswamy on the ballot score, but 5% is not nothing. Back when we saw the consideration starting to move, he was at 1. So the fact that people were viewing him favorably was a little bit of a preview into a future ballot, which we're now seeing come to fruition.
That's right. Now, the interesting part with him is it's kind of the opposite problem that Governor Christie and Governor Pence has. He's still got about 25% of voters who are unaware of him. And so that consideration number is those people convert from unaware. Well, for his sake, I hope they convert from unaware to move into people who know him. He's got to get them in that would consider camp. I want to touch on something else, Bill. So we score everybody 1 through 7, and I like to look at the mean number in terms of where people are, right? What's their mean score, right? What's the average essentially score of 1 through 7 for each of them and where it moves for each month? And what we're seeing is month over month over month, that mean number is moving closer to the edges for each of them. So what I mean is for Donald Trump, for instance, his mean number from May through August was a 3.3, a 3.4, and a 3.4. It hasn't moved. His voters are pretty locked in terms of people who would consider voting for him or not consider voting for him. In terms of Governor DeSantis, he's kind of all over the map a little bit, but he's hardening himself too. So he was at a 3.6 in June, and that's moved to a 3.9 in August. It was from a 3.1 in May, meaning he's moving to the right side slowly. People are hardening their views on him, and we're seeing that in the ballot too. It's people are saying no, but also their no on him is becoming harder. But it's happening with all the candidates. The mean number is moving in the direction where they're headed anyway, which is a problem for all of them if they're trying to dislodge Donald Trump. Hardened views on this, which again, people with Donald Trump, like his mean numbers of 3.4, it's probably going to stay right around there. DeSantis is creeping up, going towards the right, moving towards that 7. Nikki Haley, 3.4 to a 3.9 to a 4.2. Vivek, his number has gradually come down a little bit, but again, we're seeing that he's moving in the direction his consideration score is going. I say all of this to say this movement in their mean number towards a lower consideration is going to make it harder for them to move back. So it's not even just we're seeing gravity impacting everybody on the ballot, but it's in this consideration score too, which does not bode well for anybody who's trying to dislodge Donald Trump from the top. People are locking in what they're thinking about in August of 2023.
Great points. Really, really, really good points. And we'll keep asking that question as we go along here in South Carolina in future months.
Yeah, it's a little wonky and it's a little in the weeds, but it really, really tells you a lot about where this race is headed, especially in South Carolina.
I had one more question from the poll that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, go for it.
And it relates to the upcoming presidential debate. We asked in the poll, our South Carolina poll, the question was, Donald Trump is considering not participating in the first Republican primary debate in August. Which of the following comes closest to your view on this? 21% said Trump can do whatever he wants. He'll never lose my support. 21%. Another 19% said, I think Trump should debate, but I'll still be voting for him. So 21 said he could do whatever he wants. 19 said he should, but I'll still be voting for him. That's 40%. 32% say, I don't care. I'm not voting for him anyway. Another 9 say it doesn't matter. I'm not going to watch anyway. 6 were unsure. 9%, these are the numbers in the middle now. 9% say I support Trump, but if he doesn't debate, I'd be open to supporting somebody else. And 3% say I support Trump, but if he doesn't debate, I'm definitely supporting somebody else. So you have 40% who are Trump people who say, it doesn't matter, or I think he should, but it's not going to affect my opinion. 40% are in his quarter regardless. 32% are, not Trump people in the first place. So let's disregard those people. Only 12% of South Carolina primary voters might change their support if Trump doesn't debate. 12%, Justin.
So nobody cares if he doesn't debate, is what you're telling me.
That is what I'm telling you. Here is my open public message to Donald Trump. Do not debate. Do not debate, Mr. President. If anyone is in your ear telling you to debate, they're doing so with some sort of personal interest in mind or self-interest in mind. Do not your own interest, their
No,
interest.
they're doing you a disservice because if nobody cares about the debate and you've got these numbers, you should not. It can only do him harm. I agree with you 100%.
Candidates are trying to goad Trump onto the stage because it helps them, not Donald Trump. Party leaders are trying to get Trump onto the stage because they're trying to make people believe that they're the ones who control this process. That's not true. Also helps their fundraising, by the way. And look, TV executives, they know if Trump's not on the stage, ratings drop, ad revenue plummets.
Oh yeah. Bill.
There is no political rationale for Donald Trump to be on the debate stage. Zero. He's winning. He's winning. He's only getting stronger. If he's not there, this is the kids table debate. And there's no reason for him to be joining the kids table. This is not me talking. This is not a political opinion. This is data. The data sends a very crystal clear message to what Donald Trump should be doing on August 23rd, and it's not debating.
He should, right. I don't know what he should be doing that day, but he should not be at the debate. I will give you this nugget too, to your point. There's a lot of special interests that have a vested interest in him showing up on there. And you mentioned the news media. This nugget from Nick Trainer gave it to me the other day, but this nugget from Playbook PM, I'm going to quote it, right? Quote, if Trump ultimately skips the debate, sources told ABC News that the DeSantis campaign believes the move could hurt the former president with primary voters who want to see him on the stage. DeSantis' campaign has been conducting polling on the issue with Republican voters in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. Close quote. Obviously, the DeSantis people want him to debate. Obviously, ABC News wants him to debate. Obviously, Politico Playbook wants him to debate. But if the DeSantis campaign is actually conducting polling on the issue with Republican voters in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, there is zero chance they have any data that supports their conclusion. They just want him to show up so they can beat up on him. It's ridiculous. He should not debate, and anyone saying otherwise does not have his interest at heart, which is a point you made, but I'm going to reiterate because it's a really key one.
Don't do it, Mr. President. Makes no sense. No sense.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. I think that's it on the poll for me. I don't think you don't have anything else, Bill, do you?
I don't. I was going to talk briefly about Ohio.
Yeah, I want to talk about Ohio.
Really, really bad defeat that we saw earlier in the week. Referendum sought to increase the threshold to 60%, right? To change, to make it essentially harder. You made the point, Justin. You were asking people to go to the polls this week to take away their voting power, correct?
Yeah, that's always a winner for people. They love that stuff. Hey, we want to make it harder for you to change stuff. So instantly you have a handicap running into this kind of thing. So it really turned into a fight as a kind of a mini proxy war between pro-life advocates and pro-choice advocates. And that's what it was couched as in the media. And coming in with that kind of handicap, again, you're on the side of trying to take power away from voters, is not a great place to start. But, why don't you frame out kind of what happened in Ohio? And I've got some thoughts in terms of the parties that were at play here.
This is we know from the 2020 campaign, Justin, Biden barely contested the state politically. This is not a pink state. This is a red state these days. This is not the state that Obama won a decade ago. You should have had enough, in my estimation, Republicans, pro-life voters, church-going Catholics, heavy Catholic state, as we know, and even conservative Democrats in the state to have won this fight. Trump won it by 450,000 votes in 2016, even more in 2020. Mike DeWine, the governor, won by 25% last November. The sheer politics of the state should have put this in the win column. My bigger concern, which you're going to talk about, Justin, is what this means for the pro-life movement. They've been losing the messaging battle for years. Now they're losing support on the issue, even among Republicans. Less Republicans are as pro-life as the national pro-life groups are. And now they're losing elections. They lost referenda in Kentucky, Montana, Kansas, all last year. And these aren't, by the way, those states, these aren't capitals of liberalism like New York and California. My concern with the national pro-life movement, they love to issue press releases saying that Donald Trump is not pro-life enough. Presidential candidates Republican presidential candidates are not pro-life enough. While they're issuing these public proclamations from their ivory towers, pro-choice movements, groups are on the ground in these states, organizing, mobilizing, winning elections.
Yeah.
The pro-life movement needs to be less of a debating society and more of the bare-knuckled political operation that pro-choicers have behind them.
Well, yeah. And Bill, I want to take a step back. I agree with everything you said, but I think what's happened, you talked about kind of party politics, Republicans versus Democrats, and I think that's important, and that's the lens that this election gets viewed through. But you have to take kind of a step back, because since Dobbs, I think party identification matters so much less than it used to. So let's just talk about the Dobbs decision last June 2022, which overturned Roe versus Wade. So what did Roe versus Wade do effectively? Roe versus Wade said, hey, states, there's a constitutional right to an abortion in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and you can't decide abortion policy anymore. Boiled down to its essence, that's what it said, meaning it's out of your hands. Okay? So there's a lot of stuff wrong with that. It excludes a lot. Puts people in different camps, and the camps it put people in was, you had pro-life groups and pro-choice groups. The pro-choice groups, which are, think of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, Planned Parenthood, you name it. These groups were all for, we're going to defend Roe. There's a constitutional right to an abortion in the Constitution. The other side, the pro-life groups, are largely run by people who have deeply held beliefs about the life movement and think that abortion is wrong. But that coalition, because of the way Roe versus Wade was set up, actually included far more people than believe in just that abortion is wrong. You had people who think, well, I'm not totally against abortion, but after a certain period of time, abortion shouldn't be allowed anymore. Those people were in the pro-life group because they weren't able to express themselves and make those decisions. The court took it away from them in Roe. You had people who might be 100% pro-choice, but were constitutionalists, meaning they said, hey, look, I'm pro-choice, but there's nothing in the 14th Amendment the 14th Amendment was about making sure slaves had the same rights, or freed slaves had the same rights as everybody else. There's nothing about abortion in there. So I'm against Roe versus Wade. The pro-life movement before Dobbs was against Roe versus Wade and had enjoyed a really large coalition. Since Dobbs came out, that coalition doesn't really exist anymore, or it exists in a different form. Before Dobbs, the pro-life movement was fighting an absolutist position on abortion, meaning fighting the position that abortion's guaranteed in the Constitution. There's nothing you can do about it. Post Dobbs, a lot of the leaderships of these groups is fighting for an absolutist position, which is, let's ban abortion. And the coalitions that exist between those two, it's a very different fight. It's a very different intellectual fight. It's a very different political fight. The polling on these things is really important to look at now. Before Republicans get worried about this or too concerned about it, sooner rather than later, the Republican Party is going to get to the sweet spot in polling on this issue, which is abortions allowed with some restrictions. We see it in national polls all the time. 15-week bans, 20-week, who knows what the number is? I'm certainly not well-versed enough to know what the right number is. But pretty soon we're going to get to the right position on this before the Democrats do. Why? Because the Democrats are a wholly owned subsidiary of Planned Parenthood and NARAL, Pro-Choice America, and they cannot move off of their absolutist position. They can't compromise on this issue. As we know, over the years, the pro-life movement kind of had a hammerlock on Republican politics. That is less so today. And it's less so today because of Dobbs. And I think you're going to see Republicans be able to get to where the American voter is on abortion a lot easier than Democratic politicians will. Bill, I've been talking a ton, but I want to give one kind of example of where we are. I think the abortion issue matters in elections a lot right now. I think, as you pointed out with this Ohio thing, we're kind of getting our butts kicked on it a little bit. And I think it's going to matter going forward. But I view this as I view the gay marriage fights in 2004 when the Bush team got gay marriage bans on the ballot in states, ran over the Democrats, pushed these things through, and it was a boon to Republican politics everywhere. That didn't last very long, right? Public opinion on it really changed pretty rapidly and kind of moved. I view this abortion fight as kind of the same thing. 2022, some of these states, not all of them, not New York, not others, the abortion issue mattered a lot and it drove turnout. As positions moderate within the party, you're going to see this boomerang on Democrats in a really deep and meaningful way. And Republicans are going to get to the right answer on this a lot faster than Democrats will. So I agree with you. The messaging's off, but I think we're kind of in a jumble right now post Dobbs. And the sorting hat from Hogwarts is going to put everybody in the right camp sooner rather than later. And I think Republicans will own this issue and be successful on it in the coming years.
Well, we've better get out of this jumble quick because big implications are coming next year. Democrats are already pouncing in states like Arizona and other battleground presidential states after what happened in Ohio this week. And the pro-choice movement is even more emboldened. We know Democrats are not excited about Joe Biden. Polling shows that nearly half of Democrats don't want him to even run again. Liberal groups are going to use abortion politics to fill in Joe Biden's enthusiasm gap and drive their base to the polls, drive excitement. This issue and the groups that power this issue, they're going to be the fuel for Joe Biden's candidacy that he really, really needs. And Emily's List, pro-choice groups, they understand if you don't win elections, it doesn't matter. I really hope that our side, the pro-life side, really starts to understand that this is more than press release and press release issuing and shouting from ivory towers. Like, we need to get back to winning the issue on the ground, because if you don't, you're completely irrelevant.
Well, yeah, and I'll add something to that though. I think Republicans in the early 90s were getting their butts kicked on this issue too, and they kind of figured it out by taking a more incremental approach to the pro-life side of things, right? They stopped being their big issue was a partial birth abortion ban, which was wildly popular, and it really put Democrats in a box, and that can happen again. One other thing to note, the Democrats in 24 are certainly going to use this. They're going to put these things on the ballot to drive turnout and drive interest and link it to the Biden candidacy, et cetera. But in states where there's enshrined long-term rights to an abortion, that's going to be harder to do. Michigan you only get to fire that gun once. And so in states like Michigan, Democrats are going to be hard pressed to try to lean on that issue as an issue. Voters are smarter than people give them credit for. And in states where it's not an issue, I think Democrats are going to really regret pushing it as an issue because it's just not going to help them.
Good points. All good points.
Bill, I think that's all the time we got for today, man. So
man,
we're going to just have to pick it up next week. If you like this podcast, like it, follow it, share it with your friends. Tell everybody in the world about it. That will be the most important thing you do this week, is telling everybody how much you like the Yes Labels podcast. I mean it. It's super important. Super important. Got to spread the word. Spread the word. Have a great week. We'll catch up with you next week-ish. Take us away.